Woo! Wow. Welcome back to the German winter, the German tundra. It's really, really uncomfortable at the moment. It is almost March and I really hope winter is over soon. But we're having another video. We have a very exciting camera release with the Fujifilm X-T4. And today I want to talk about the downsides of that camera, because on the sheets, on the specs, it looks absolutely perfect. But there are a couple of downsides, and that is what we are going to talk about in this video. So the YouTube world seems to be super excited about that camera, and for a good reason, because it finally has almost everything that a YouTuber needs to make good videos and for vlogging. It has in-body image stabilization, which is super important for walking like this, running and gunning, filming on the move. It has good autofocus, which is also super important for video, and it thankfully has the flippy screen on the side. So I think these are the three most important things, but in addition to that, it also has very good video image quality. It has 4K 60 frames per second. It has good slow motion. It has 120 frames in 1080p, and it even has 240 frames in 1080p. And from what I saw, the quality is pretty good. The autofocus is still working on these high frame rates. In addition to the IBIS, it also has electronical image stabilization on top of that. And it also has a very nice body with nice buttons and dials. So it's kind of everything you want from a YouTuber's camera, right? But it also has a couple of downsides that are, in my opinion, not pointed out enough by now, because at the moment only these pre-production cameras are being sent out to bigger YouTubers that review these cameras, and they most of the time focus on the positives of the camera, and it sounds almost too good to be true. So that's what we're talking about, the downsides right now. And one of the downsides is also the IBIS, the in-body image stabilization. It is in the camera, no doubt, but from what I saw so far, it doesn't look that great. I think it's definitely a step above the Sony image stabilization, and Canon for most of the cameras only has electronical ones. But then if you compare to a Panasonic, or even, of course it's an unfair comparison, but to a GoPro or a phone nowadays, it is really, really not that great. I think it is kind of usable, and it's definitely better than have none. And I wish camera companies would get it just a little bit better. And I think Fuji is on the right way now, and it's one of the best we see in an APC camera. I think Panasonic might still have the edge above that. But yeah, like I said, IBIS, it's there, it's usable, but not that great. All right, while I'm walking a little bit towards the wind picked up a little bit. I'm using the Smart Lav from Rode today. Curious how that turns out, quality, audio-wise. But yeah, second point that is not as good on the camera is actually the autofocus. Like I said, it's one of the most important things to have on a YouTuber's vlogging camera, and the autofocus is, again, good, but in my mind it's nowhere near on the level of a Sony or a Canon camera. From what I see from the reviews from the YouTubers so far, is there's definitely some of this pulsing, like it's hunting for the focus on the faces, on the background, and it's definitely pulsing. Sometimes it looks very bad, sometimes it's not a big issue, but if you, for example, want to use it on slow motion, then it might even render the footage unusable if that's the exact moment in time that you want it for your video. And again, all the reviews at that point, when they talk about the autofocus, they state it's a pre-production model. Fuji might fix it with firmware updates, and that's great, and it might happen, but we don't know that for sure. And at the moment, it is definitely not the best autofocus. I think it will be usable again, but definitely not the best one. And I think my third point, and the biggest downside of this camera, and people are not stressing this enough, is the size and the weight. And yes, the Fuji is not a full frame camera. It is an APS-C camera, so it should be on the smaller side, but in the APS-C spectrum with all the Sony Alpha 6000s and the Canon M50s, M6s, it is definitely on the upper, bigger and heavier side. It's kind of echoey here. I hope the audio is still okay. So the Fuji X-T4 weighs about 600 grams for the body only. And if you add a couple of lenses and microphones and a handle, a selfie stick, whatever, it becomes quite heavy. If you compare it to a Canon M50 or M6 or a Sony a6400, I think those weigh about 420, 430 grams, in the low 400s. So it's only 200 grams difference, but they make a difference. I'm gonna leave this weird dam here because it's kind of echoey, and I don't know if you understand me decently. There's a dog barking upstairs. I don't know what's happening. I think the dogs might be coming. This is like the most urban spot we have here in this small town, so woo! So, and the weight problem doesn't really end with the body, because you have to definitely always look at the available lenses for the system you're buying into. And the Fuji lenses are kind of on the heavier side and definitely also on the more pricey side. So if you look at the interesting lenses, the one I would want to get is absolutely the ultra wide angle lens, the Fujinon 10 to 24 millimeter, and that lens weighs 400 grams. And if you compare that to the biggest competitors, the Sony 10 to 18 millimeter super wide angle lens only weighs 225 grams, kind of half of the weight, and the Canon 11 to 22 millimeter EFM mount lens also weighs 220 grams, just as much as the Sony, so they are almost half the weight of the Fuji one. Another interesting one is the 16 millimeter Fuji f1.4, which is very good for low light and more cinematic shot with the blurrier background. And it's kind of almost like the same lens as the Sigma 16 millimeter 1.4. They both are about the same size and weight. I think the Sigma is even a little bit heavier with 400 grams and the Fuji is 375 grams. But if you compare these two lenses, the Fuji one costs $1,000 and the Sigma one $350. So if you think about rigging it up, the 600 gram camera with a 400 gram lens is a kilogram, then you put a selfie stick on it and a microphone, you're well above 1 kilogram of weight. And you might think that's not a lot of weight. I'm a guy. Like, hey, I can hold this up as long as I want. But you should really try that out. Right now I'm vlogging with a GoPro and I can basically hold that thing up for as long as I want. And my other camera is the Canon M50, which weighs about 400 grams, plus the wide angle lens, it's 630 grams, and then a little bit of mic stuff, it's about 700 grams. And you will not believe how big the difference is between walking around with the GoPro, which is maybe 200, 300 grams. I have it on a pretty long pole right now, so I can do stuff like this, so that pole is a little heavier. But in the end, if you got the GoPro with the smaller stick, it's just 200 grams, and between 200 grams from the GoPro to the 700 of the mirrorless camera that I have, it's a huge, huge difference. And if you go the step from the 700 gram camera to the 1.1 or 1.2 kilogram that the X-T4 would weigh, it will be another big step up. And if you go around, especially if you're traveling, you're trying to move around a lot, you want to be light. And seriously, every gram counts, and it definitely makes a big difference. And I think that is absolutely understated by most YouTubers. And I think that's the biggest downside of the X-T4, the size and the weight. And then I don't really know if you can call that a downside, but it is not a cheap camera. And it, of course, really depends on you. How much budget do you have to spend on a camera? What do you want to do with it? Is it semi-professional? But the camera body alone is $1,700. And then the above mentioned lenses that I would like to have, the ultra wide one and the 60mm, they're each $1,000. If you start with the ultra wide one, which is probably the go-to lens for a YouTuber, get a little bit of accessories, and at the tax in the US, it will be $3,000, $3,000 for that camera. If you think about it, the price range is already in some full frame territory. You could look at the Sony A7 III or a Nikon Z6, or maybe a Canon EOS R or RP even might be way cheaper. So you can go into full frame territory for the same price. However, I would not recommend to do that, because all the downsides I just listed are even bigger. It's the same downsides and they're even bigger with full frame cameras. They are bigger, they are heavier, their lenses will be way bigger, way heavier. It will be a huge setup. It will be more expensive still with the lenses if you calculate them in, and they usually don't have the up-to-date specs like the X-T4 has. So I would at the moment absolutely recommend the X-T4 over a full frame camera, any of those I just mentioned. I think it's all around the better camera. I think really APS-C is the sweet spot for YouTubers. I just wish that camera would be like 450, 500 grams, which I know is probably not possible, but that would be an absolute dream. The bottom line for me is, I think the Fuji X-T4 is the best all-around YouTuber's camera that you can buy at the moment. However, you just have to be aware of these downsides. It is not a small and light camera. It's not super subtle if you film with it. The lenses you will have to buy are pretty expensive and not on the light side too. If you have the money though, you don't care about the money, you'll probably get the best quality at the moment from the X-T4. I would absolutely recommend it over any of the Sony Alpha cameras. If you're on a tighter budget like me, still would suggest going with the Canon M50 if you just want to spend $800–900 for a decent camera with a good lens. Then that's the way to go. But in the end, I think the Fuji X-T4 is the closest that we have come yet to the perfect YouTubers vlogging camera if you don't want to go with GoPro.